Ooh. All right. Woo. We're back. Welcome to Movies with Mark for another review stream. We got a lot to cover today. I always do this. I always bunch up the live streams where we get like so many films we got to cover. So of course, the big film that we've got to cover today, obviously, is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It's releasing tonight. You know, it is like they say it releases on Friday, but we have Thursday screenings. Thursday preview screenings are always out there. So we'll be taking a look at that, the latest Marvel film. We'll also be taking a look at a few other films from the past weekend, such as The Bad Guys. And I believe Pompo the Cinephile also came out last week. That's a new anime we'll be talking about. Bad Guys is also animated. A lot of animated films recently. And then we will be talking about The Northmen, the new Viking revenge picture from Robert Eggers. And then, of course, the most Nicolas Cagey movie, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. So, all right. I guess we'll go straight to the big one because, you know, why not get straight to the top one? All right. So we'll start covering Doctor Strange here. I'm just gonna get the notes assembled. We'll get that on the side here, just because I know I'm terrible with names, so gotta have all the notes out there. So yeah, and just for anyone who's curious, this is a spoiler-free review, so we're gonna try to reveal as little as possible for those who have not seen it yet. I'd imagine that probably unlike maybe unlike the East Coast, they probably just got done seeing it. I know that usually the Thursday screenings are usually in like the early evening, so chances are they're probably seeing it right now if they haven't. It's weird though, because like we got we do like the press screeners that we always do, and then they actually had like a public screening, which I was surprised about. So hopefully they can keep the spoilers in, because usually it was easy because just like you know. For the big Marvel films, you'd always just like get like one press screener and then, you know, hush hush on all the spoilers. But hopefully everyone else keeps their mouths shut as best they can, which is what I'm going to do right now, mind you. So let me get all my notes out here so that we're all good to go. All right. We all ready for this? Diving back into the MCU once more. Onto the breach, comic book movies. All right. Ready for this? 3, 2, 1. So Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness comes from director Sam Raimi. So like it's keeping with the tradition of having, you know, a horror director attached to this story of a sorcerer. The last film was, of course, directed by Scott Derrickson. He was known for like a few horror films like Sinister and all that. So we got another horror director, Sam Raimi, who's actually no stranger to comic book films, with obviously the Spider-Man films that he's done. But I was surprised actually how much horror that Raimi actually gets to do in this MCU Doctor Strange movie. Now I should say, like, it's wild. I love the fact there's a lot of stuff that I would not expect to see in an MCU film, and at the same time, there's a little bit of sadness too, because like it feels like I just hit the ceiling of how much horror we can expect from the MCU in terms of like keeping the MCU PG-13. Maybe one day they'll with enough time, maybe they'll make the jump to R-rated films, at least within like the bigger scope of the MCU. Of course, like outside of that, you know, they'll do stuff like Deadpool and stuff, but maybe someday we'll get that R-rated Doctor Strange movie, but not now, unfortunately, which is kind of sad, because this film actually does go into some pretty terrifying and horrific places. And I think the problem with that is like visually and in terms of atmosphere, this film works as like a horror film. It has that perfect amount of like dread and giddiness that Sam Raimi usually put into stuff like, you know, like Evil Dead and Army of Darkness. There are a lot of shades of those types of films in there, especially when you have like stuff like dark magic and zombies and, you know, all this bizarre stuff of like, distorting reality, all works perfectly for Raimi's style. It's just, it's kind of unfortunate that like a lot of like the characters get sidelined just because like there's so much to do in this film in terms of like how like the multiverse is connected and how it's breaking and how it shatters and how Doctor Strange has to put everything back together again. That I didn't realize this until I got to the end of the film, but this film is almost like exactly 2 hours. And you can really feel that because there's not a whole lot of time spent where we get to know a lot of these characters, that we can appreciate them a little bit more. Like Benedict Cumberbatch returns as Doctor Strange here, and I think he has more an interesting arc that he could have in this film. Like obviously his arc in this film is more about, like getting over the past, like, of course, trying to repair himself after like, the big blip where he was gone for 5 years. So trying to rebuild his life from that and having a sense of letting go. All that's a great arc for him to pursue, but unfortunately there's not much time for it because every moment that we think we're going to get a little bit more character from him, there's always something else happening. Like even from like very early on in the film, like we think that there's going to be some like moment of like regret and catharsis that he like, we can see it in him. Like it's it's bubbling, but before anything can come of it, like, there's another monster to attack, or there's another like break in reality he's got to repair. It's just like Doctor Strange is just like, he's too busy, he has too much on his plate. Like, and I guess like I think that works for Sam Raimi, who's used to like doing Spider-Man, where he can barely balance his own life. But still, even within like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, there always felt like there was some time to get to slow down and get to like be with the character and to understand him a little bit more. And the problem with this film is there's barely any time to spend with Strange outside of all like the wild and crazy magic that's going on in this film, which, don't get me wrong, is cool. Like style wise, there's a lot of stuff that I did not expect to see in a Marvel film of this nature, and I'm glad that it's in there. It's just like, I can't help but feel like there's like an extra 20 minutes of like character development that really could have pushed this film further, that really could have given it more. Because there's not a lot of time to slow down. Like now you think there might be like a bigger connection with the addition of America Chavez, who is this teenage girl. She's played by I'm gonna screw up her name here. Just say as best I can here. Xochitl Gomez. And it feels like, okay, so it's another teenager that Doctor Strange has to deal with. So again, we have like, the daddy wizard who has to help out the teenager with his mess. And I thought, okay, this could be cute. I really dug how, Doctor Strange interacted with Peter Parker in the last Spider-Man film. This could be a good dynamic. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of time. Like, it starts off with some decent back and forth, but there's not a whole lot of time to get to know these characters. That in one of the most clumsy moments, there's a scene, and I won't divulge it because I'm trying to keep it spoiler free, but there is a scene where both of their pasts, like that they're haunted by, are kind of revealed in the most like blunt and frankly clumsy way that they could have. It's like, okay, we've got to get this on the table. Let's just get this out there as quickly as possible. Even if it's in a weird way. It's in a weird, like, oh, okay, I get it, you gotta get out this exposition, but I don't know, I feel like there might have been a better way for this. And the same goes, like, all around for all the characters. There's a lot of characters here, obviously a few, like, special appearances that we're not going to spoil here, but in terms of, like, the characters that we do know, Shitewell, I keep screwing up his name, Shitewell Ejiofor, who plays Carl Mordo, who you might remember from the last Doctor Strange movie way back in 2016, was set up to be the villain, and he kind of fits into that villain arc here, but more in like a supporting role. Like he's not as present, and we kind of suspect, like, where he's going to be going in his life and how he despises Doctor Strange, and it kind of leads up to a whole lot of nothing. Benedict Wong, of course, returns as the Sorcerer Supreme of Wong, who is always fun. Anytime he shows up, between like the last few films of like Spider-Man and Shang-Chi, he was a lot of fun to see him pop up on the screen. I just wish he had more of an arc, because he just shows up as just like the quirky, fun sorcerer, but he's always got something to do. It just, I don't know. I kind of feel like we need like a whole series just with Wong, just to appreciate him more. You get Rachel McAdams, who comes back as Christine Palmer, the love interest of Doctor Strange, which, to her credit, she has way more to do in this film than she did the previous one. And she actually plays like a much more pivotal role than I expected, and she joins in quite a bit with Doctor Strange. But similar to the way that the film treats treats Chavez, it feels like she's more or less like a prop for Doctor Strange to get to the next part of developing more as a character. So, like, and I don't want to like demean like McAdams' role. Like, her role in this film it's way better than the last film. I'll say that. She's a lot more fun to watch in this film. She has way more to do. She plays a much more pivotal role. And yet I can't help but feel like there's way more you could do with her as well. Just because, God, I really don't want to spoil as much, but she is kind of like a big key in all this. I will say the one character I think has the most interesting like staging of their development, not so much like they had like the best arc, because their arc was pretty predictable, but Elizabeth Olsen returns as Wanda Maximoff, or Scarlet Witch, however you want to look at her, and I was surprised they in the film they actually lean more into this horror angle that I always really wanted with WandaVision. And it was like, WandaVision was so close to getting it. It was so close to being that horror monster movie. But because ultimately the show decided that it wanted to be more about the stages of grief and the acceptance of it, rather than, building it up to the monster story. Which honestly, I think that would have been a much better route to go, especially when you consider what happens in this film, to kind of favor more of the monster side, because the film kind of explores her in this way, and it's fascinating to watch how she plays a huge role in this film. At the same time, however, a lot of like the smaller emotional moments that she has with a lot of her drive is kind of on a very predictable track. And once you get to those little moments that are trying to, build up some empathy and some sympathy for her, they're kind of hollow. And I think it's just because the performances that she's playing off here don't really add a lot to it. And it just feels like, oh, okay, this is the standard moment that we've got to get to, where we've got to feel a little bit more for Wanda, and we understand more about her. It was kind of telegraphed early, and we could see this coming a mile away, but whatever, I guess we got to get to it. But I mean, like, for as much problems as they had with like the underdeveloped characters, the style of this film ultimately trumps it. Like, because I know like a big argument that a lot of people are going to have about this film is that it is style over substance. And you know what? Part of that is kind of true. There is a lot more to the style here. You can tell they put a lot more effort into having, Doctor Strange and Wong fight like that giant Cyclops tentacle creature that we all saw in the previews, as opposed to like his interpersonal conflict, which you think would have like a bigger role as kind of like almost like the catalyst for Doctor Strange's story. And unfortunately, because we get lost a bit in the multiverse, which, don't get me wrong, is fun. I like the different universes that we go to, and how it definitely feels a lot more comic booky, with how the Doctor Strange movie is very much not fearful about different directions it could go. It very much felt like, whenever you're reading like an event comic book, and then there would be like a surprise in the next issue, or there'd be a cliffhanger or a stinger where some other character would come in, or this bizarre development would happen, or this wild new costume or whatever would happen. There are a whole lot of moments like that, which are fun on the surface. On the surface, it's a lot of fun to see what this film tries out, especially if you're a Raimi fan. There's a lot of Raimi's great hallmarks in here. You get the Dutch angles where like the camera will tilt. You'll get like the creepy zooms that I forget like the technique it is, but like you basically like push the camera in as you zoom out, and it creates that kind of like eerie effect that we've seen in like Evil Dead and stuff. And speaking of Evil Dead, you've got a whole bunch of sequences where like the camera like shakes around and like follows characters. You have a few not to give too much away, but there's some dabbling with the dead that gets into a little bit of like some cackling territory here, which is kind of great. There's definitely some very tongue-in-cheek moments here. Although, again, like I don't know, maybe this is like my desires of like wanting to see more of like Evil Dead in a Doctor Strange movie, but it always made me feel like, okay, just a little bit further, go a little bit like. Pardon the pun, but stranger. Go a little bit further with all of this. Make the magic weirder. Make the multiverse more bizarre. Make the magic make even less sense. In some cases, it doesn't make sense. It's like, okay, this is neat. Let's go further with this stuff. And it almost gets there. It almost fully becomes a horror movie, although. Like on a whole, like it almost becomes a horror movie, but in little bits and segments. And you're probably going to see this when people start getting clips of the footage that release around the time when it goes on Disney Plus or on Blu-ray. You're going to see little clips where people are going to say, "Oh man, look at this tiny sequence here. This is like a perfect horror film." Or this sequence here, this is a great little horror film right here. And those little moments like that, I think, are wonderful for like this type of film. And frankly, I think the film actually, like, a lot of people complain that a lot of these films like go on too long. I think this one's a little bit too short. Because it's like I said, it's exactly 2 hours, and you feel like you've spent more time with just like the bizarre and surreal nature of the multiverse than you actually have with Doctor Strange and like the few familiar and new characters that are thrown into the mix here. Especially because like, and then of course, they do the whole like post-credit stinger here. And I think because we haven't had a lot of time to get used to so much of like the wildness of the multiverse or like the plight of Doctor Strange as much, that it doesn't hit as much. Like it wasn't like as much as like a shrug as like the Morbius post-credit scene was, where he's just kind of like, oh, okay, whatever, we'll do an ensemble or whatever. There's definitely some weirder development that Doctor Strange is going to have in whatever film he's in next. But on the whole, just in terms of like the MCU trying to make a horror film, I think it mostly works here. There's a lot of fun moments here that I'm gonna have a lot of fun going back to watch again. I just wish that there were just a little bit more to Doctor Strange's character, because it still feels like he's a passenger in his own story. Like he's just kind of going with the flow. It's like, okay, this happened. I guess I guess this is the route I'm going now. Or, oh, okay, I'm in this universe, I'll adjust to it. Without giving too much away, though, yes, there are some surprise cameos in here, and then I will admit, though, I'm a little bit annoyed by the fact that the big cameos all have to combine into one scene here. And I think maybe it's just because, like, with the past few Marvel films, they've all kind of had, like, this, like, similar structure where we almost kind of expect these, surprises and cameos, that by the time they happen, it's just, like, it's kind of par for the course. Because, like, you watch something like Spider-Man No Way Home, and it's like, okay, cool, we get to see all, like, these, classic villains from, like, the Amazing Spider-Man movies and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And here, we do have some surprise cameos, but they're all collected in one scene, and they're staged in a way where, you have to wait for the music sting, and the film pauses for, your cheers and applause, which very much so, like, for a few Marvel fans who are expecting certain characters or characters that they didn't expect to see in Doctor Strange, that they will be, like, cheering and clapping. And for me, it's just kind of like, okay, this is par for the course. I don't know, maybe it's just because after getting done watching Moon Knight and having that show not have any cameos, like, I'm ready for, like, a Marvel film to stand on its own. Like, we kind of got that with the Eternals, and even like Shang-Chi and partially like Black Widow. Those types of films didn't really have as many cameos, and if they did, they were like kind of like small, kind of like, oh yeah, these people exist in this world. But yeah, for all the expected elements of it, they're okay. They didn't bother me. Like they're not quite stale. I did get a little bit of a giddy thrill over who pops up in this film, specifically for how they relate to to the Doctor Strange story, but they're kind of wearing thin. Thankfully, though, the directing here, the entire style of the film with all like the Dutch angles and the zooming in and the crazy dark elements and the multiverse tapping and all this bizarre logic that involves like dark magic and dreams, apparently, it's all fun, surreal, bizarre stuff, and it actually takes a lot of risks here. Which you don't see in most Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that usually stick along a specific track. And if you're going to have a film that delves into the multiverse, which you've already gotten, a tiny bit of, like with Spider-Man No Way Home, and a huge chunk of it with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I think this is a great route. And Sam Raimi definitely made a Sam Raimi Marvel movie that actually has even more horror elements than the Spider-Man movies had. So there's that. I'm glad that at least Sam is getting in a little bit more of his... getting a little bit more horror into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Especially for Doctor Strange. It could really use some stuff like this. So, I enjoyed that film. Alright. Okay, what's next? What do we got next up here? You know what? I'll get to one of the more recent ones, which I doubt many people have seen. Pompo the Cinephile. This is a new anime from G-Kids. There's not a whole lot that like info I got on this. I'm looking it up here. I know it's from like Studio Clap. Where are my notes here? They didn't give me like too many notes for this, so this kind of gonna have to make this up as I go along. Well, not make it up, just roll with it. All right. Let's get the notes up here. And we'll get into the next film. So, Pompo the Cinephile is I'm hesitant to call it like an anime all about filmmaking because it seems to exist in kind of like this more like this more fantastical version of what a lot of people dream that that making a movie is like. And on that level, it's actually kind of admirable, even if it does seem to like shave off a few corners here and there, just to make it like a little bit more fantastical and whimsical, and have a lot of anime tropes, which it did not surprise me. Like, I didn't know this until I watched the film, but apparently it's based on a manga, and you can tell what type of manga it was trying to be. So the film takes place in this fictional version of Hollywood that I believe is called Neollywood. I believe it's called. It's something weird like that. It starts with NY. But basically, it's a fictional version of Hollywood in which apparently there's a whole bunch of like odd developments that have made certain filmmaking possible. Specifically with the character of Pompo, who is apparently I assume like she's like a teenager or at least like a young adult who's this very like squat little anime girl who acts like a typical anime girl who's a producer of this big Hollywood studio. And apparently she's like a huge like child prodigy. She's basically like the Doogie Howser of of film producing. So she runs her own studio. She basically specializes in B movies. And she basically calls all the shots. Surprisingly, though, the film isn't really about her so much as it's about Gene Finney, who is this basically production assistant who's wanting to break into movies. And Gene, they establish, is someone who's like way dedicated to his craft. And you can tell that by the fact that his character is designed with like permanent bags under his eyes. And you do feel at least that this guy's got to be at least in his 20s, just because his height's a little bit more. He acts like a little less childish. He acts like, that person who's stayed up way too late for his finals. And Gene is basically given like the chance of a lifetime here. Basically, Pompo sees that, because this guy is devoted to everything filmmaking, she takes a chance on Gene. She says like, hey, we got a B movie coming up. Can you edit our trailer for it? And of course he takes to this like, because he's been taking notes the whole time, he takes to this like it's an amazing experience. And that's the one thing I gotta mention. Like, this film, I think, is something that a lot of like video editors are really gonna love, just because they, in the same way that like anime would stylize stuff like cooking and like tennis with Prince of Tennis, this anime tries to heighten and stylize video editing. So there's this whole great sequence whenever like Gene is editing film, where he imagines himself in this world with just like constant like strings of like film and just him with a sword dicing it up and cutting it up, which is adorable. It's fun and it's cute in that, on that angle. And it's also great to see how Gene kind of like gets excited, you know, the further that he gets in the process, because then the trailer does so well that Pompo decides, oh well, you know, what's the next step for you? Oh, let's get you directing a film. I just wrote this script. How about you direct it? And just like, oh, okay, well, this is a dream come true. And at the same time, he's also working with another actress who Pompo just takes a chance on. So basically, it's like Pompo is kind of like the good businessman who gives all these, you know, youngsters a fair shot at breaking into films. So there, I mean, there's a little bit of like a concerning angle on that level, but at the same time, it's a lot of fun to watch just Gene get really excited about, like, you know, trying to develop his own film. At the same time, however, there's a little bit of like a simplistic nature here that I think it doesn't quite explore as much as like the cynical side of things. It feels a lot like and I was trying to think of like what this reminded me of, and I think it reminds me a bit of like the films of Juzo Itami. Basically, Juzo Itami did like a whole bunch of films about like you know, characters who were very invested in their career and loved their job. So stuff like A Taxing Woman and Supermarket Woman and Tampopo did all those pictures. It's very similar to that. And it's also similar in how it kind of like romanticizes the process and doesn't really show much of a huge like the darker side of it, like I said. Like for instance, when we get to the third act, Gene is basically like he's tasked with editing his film after having successfully shot it, which it's a lot of fun watching him shoot, because it's fun to watch like his mind reel and try to figure out stuff that he can do on set that works, and seeing it pay off like just electrifies him. But then he gets to the editing process and it just wears him down to the point where he's overworked and he can barely function by the end of it. And you can't help but feel like there should be like some moment where he's kind of got to like recognize, like, you know, how grueling the process could be. Just for like a little bit of a moment, it feels like we get a little bit of that, but not as much as it could have been, because again, this film wants to be very heartfelt, wants to like, you know, see Gene push forward and succeed the further that he goes. And on that level, it kind of works. It's kind of admirable to show like this film where filmmaking looks like a fun and exciting experience. Where it kind of rounds off the corners, which are kind of a little bit concerning, is how Gene doesn't really push back on too much. Like they do kind of stress that, like, look, Gene, if you want to be a director, you've got to like take charge here. But I think there's like a little bit of a concerning moment where apparently one of the specifications from Pompo is that Gene needs to keep this film 90 minutes exactly. And it's mainly because Pompo says that, you know, like films that are too long, you know, most people won't see them and they're not that good. So you got to keep it 90 minutes. Which I'm kind of conflicted about, because like on one level, like you don't want to feel like you're that much, like you're that restricted, even though like like from a business perspective, obviously it makes sense. So I guess like in that range of like, you know, dealing with a producer who's trying to make a commercial movie, it would make sense. The thing is, the film that Gene is working on is like, it's supposed to be like an Oscar contender. It's meant to be like an Academy Award winning film, and like it's about a maestro and like him coming to terms with himself, and he ventures out to the country, he has a romance and all these dramatic elements. And Papa wants to cut down to 90 minutes, and it nearly drives Gene mad. And the thing is, if this were just like a weird B movie, I could understand that, but like the thing is, like a lot of Academy Award films are actually kind of a little bit longer than 90 minutes, and some of them are ridiculously long, in fact. I mean, like you might remember from this year's Academy Awards, like Drive My Car. That film is 3 hours long. I mean, of course, yeah, it's not much of an audience pleaser, but it feels weird that because I feel like there's a bigger discussion there about what films do you want to be awards worthy and which one do you want to be audience pleasers. And I guess on that level, it's easier to relate to I said Tampopo, Pompo, Juzo Otami on the brain here. And on that level, it's kind of like interesting to relate to Pompo as like a business person because she feels very much like going back to Otami again. It feels very much like a taxing woman in that regard, and then watching someone become like an apprentice of it. In terms of like, and there are like some very clear. It's weird because like it exists in like this like kind of fictional universe, but it kind of has like some shades of reality. Like the whole 90-minute rule comes up when Gene says he wants to watch Cinema Paradiso, which is a very long movie. I think it's roughly 3 hours. And Pompo says like, I can't really stand it because the film is too long. So apparently in this universe, Cinema Paradiso exists in some form. We don't quite know what. But then you also have like a few like stand-ins. Like you have there's an actor that he works with that he loves called Martin Braddock, who I think is supposed to be kind of like a Marlon Brando type, who has a little bit of an ego, a little bit of insight, and just is a very committed actor. And there's little like shades of like different types of films you can see there. Like the B movie they're working on in the beginning of the film is just wonderfully absurd and involves like tentacles and monsters and bikinis and machine guns. It's like it's a film that Roger Corman would have loved. And the fact that like Pompo goes from that film into like a big awards-worthy film is kind of unique. I think, like I said, I think the people who are going to love this most are going to be editors, just because like part of the first act and then nearly all the third act is just like it's just stylizing the editing process. The second act I think is just beautiful for how they want to make the very act of filmmaking look amazing and like fast paced, and where you have to like keep up and try to keep your mind creative on the job and on set. That it mostly works. But again, like it's one of those things where it's like you really do have to place it in that universe because there's a lot of like hidden darkness they don't quite show about like the filmmaking process that they kind of stylize a little bit too much here that I wish would have been expanded upon. But in terms of just being like kind of like a more like fanciful and anime style depiction of filmmaking, especially like I forgot to mention this too, there's a whole sequence where they try to convince an accountant agency to give them more money to finish up the extra scenes they want to shoot for their film, and it's staged in a like in a very like over the top like like you clap if you believe in this film type of way that involves live streaming, which you like in any other universe this probably wouldn't work, but in this film where everything is meant to be like exaggerated and heartfelt, you can kind of believe it working here. So like in terms of just having fun with the filmmaking process, I think this film mostly works, and I really do hope that it inspires some of the youngsters who will probably watch this anime to venture out there, just make your own film, even if you can't get into a studio, just do it because you love it. Because I do like the fact that Gene really loves this stuff, and Pompo to a certain degree kind of loves it, even though it sounds strange. Like it sounds like she's kind of like become past that part of like her life where it feels like she's become too hardened despite kind of looking like a small anime girl. But in general, I kind of dug the film for like its little bits here and there. Like overall, I do have some problems with the structure and the route that Gene takes and how easy stuff comes to him, and having like like the good capitalist who comes to save the day. But in terms of like the drive for like passion and all that, the film works on that level. It's very close to like a Juzo Otami film. Very much so. Okay. Whew. Blowing through these. All right, let's get more of the notes out here. 2 down and 3 to go. All right. What do we got next? Oh, we got the bad guys. Cue the Billie Eilish song. Eilish? Irish. Eilish? Wait, I forgot what it was. There was some like joke they made, like Billie Eilish was going to be on The Simpsons, and someone made a joke that's sort of like look out, Lisa, she's Eilish. Irish. To the best of my knowledge, I don't recall the song being in the film. If it did, it was perfectly placed, because that seems like something you'd use more for the trailer in the background, you know? Okay. In 3, 2, 1. So, The Bad Guys is an animated heist film about anthropomorphic animal characters who are traditionally written as villains, who realize that maybe they don't have to be the villains. Maybe they can actually be good guys and not just be the bad guys. So, very kind of like a simplistic story here. I think for some people who might have gotten used to a similar anthropomorphic film called Zootopia, which did challenge more of the nature versus nurture elements, they might be a little bit frustrated by the bad guys, because rather than better exploring, either nature versus nurture or the ethics of doing something good that is, much better for society rather than being selfish, the film just kind of reduces it to just like, bad people realizing that, oh, if you do good stuff, you feel good. Very simplistic. And, and as an adult, like, might get frustrated on that level, but considering this is a film for kids, I think it's very on the nose here, where I think kids will get the bigger lesson here about not judging people by stereotypes and all that. So yeah, very on the nose, but also very on target is another way to think of it. So the film takes place in this city where apparently these anthropomorphic animals exist alongside other human characters. Like there's a few animals strewn about. But yeah, it's apparently like human anthropomorphic universe. And there's a whole group of these animals, like a wolf, a spider, snake, piranha, shark, who are all like a big gang who basically specialize in robbing banks. And I gotta say, I like the way that their heists are staged. Like the animation style here really works. Like it's a brilliant mixture of kind of 3D, but with like little aspects of like 2D animation here and there, like little like details on the face or the smoke in the background, or like action lines here and there. Great little style for it. I love the introduction too, where you have their leader, Mr. Wolf, voiced by Sam Rockwell, basically breaking the fourth wall and explaining to the audience everything about his gang while they're in the middle of a bank heist. And apparently I didn't realize this too, but like apparently for like the whole first opening shot doesn't really have like a cut until much later in the film. Like it's a very brilliant kind of like one shot cut, for which I know it doesn't sound like much like an animated film, because yeah, in an animated film you can tailor it as much as you like, but you still have to render it all out and you have to make sure everything connects here. So there's still a lot of assembly in it. But I like that they introduce it. We get to know all the characters here. Like definitely Mr. Wolf has the most character here, just because like Mr. Wolf is the first character who realizes, oh, being good can actually mean something more, and and then he starts liking people a little bit more. All the other characters are pretty much in their specific boxes of how they're staged. Like you have Mr. Snake, who is voiced by Mark Maron, and he's basically a curmudgeon. You have Miss Tarantula, voiced by Awkwafina. She's a hacker. She doesn't really have too much of an arc here, just other than having like sass. Craig Robinson voices Mr. Shark, who's a master of disguise, which they don't really do much of it. Like it feels like he's only there for like the spy jokes, which is the joke here is that he's a master of disguise, except for the fact that he's a giant shark, and not all, and his disguises aren't convincing, but apparently they are in this universe. So he's more fun on like a visual level. And the same goes for Mr. Piranha. Mr. Piranha is basically the crazy muscle of the group, voiced by Anthony Ramos. So they all fit into their neat little boxes. They're all bad guys. They enjoy being bad guys, and they figure out that it's fun to be good. But they have to learn it the hard way. And a part of someone who makes that journey hard is Professor Rupert Marmalade IV. What a name. Voiced by Richard Ayoade. I keep mispronouncing his name. Basically, Marmalade is considered like the best animal in town. Like if they're the bad guys, he's the good guy, and he's basically taken it upon himself to teach the bad guys how to be good. And while they do this, they learn about stereotypes and how to get around them and how to prove yourself. And basically, the way that the rest of the film could be summed up is that it's basically these characters learning all about chaotic good. Especially when they get in contact with the mayor of the city, Diane Foxington, voiced by Zazie Beetz. Foxington obviously is a fox. In case it weren't clear, Marmalade is a guinea pig. It's weird. Like all the other characters have like these very like simple animal names, Mr. Wolf, Mr. Snake, and then you have Professor Marmalade. Like even Foxington has fox in her name. Oh my goodness. Like action wise, there's a lot of great action in this film, and like I said, I like the style, I like the way it's filmed. I especially like all the little cues that they take from Lupin the Third. And they're very subtle cues. Like just like definitely you can see a lot of Lupin in Mr. Wolf, based on the way he dressed, and obviously not to point it out too much here, but of course, Lupin means wolf, so Mr. Wolf, you get it. But like I said, a lot of stylistic choices that really reflect that. Like at one point, they drive around in a Fiat. Lupin used to drive a lot in a Fiat. He has a lot of like the poses that Lupin would do, like with like his arched legs and his and basically like his hung arms like that. And then, of course, and in case any of that seemed too subtle, there's a scene in the climax where he actually does like the Lupin's classic like swimming through air, which he does to like get to where he's going. So a lot of great odes to Lupin there. And I guess like the subtlety with all like the visual stuff, I think made the film work for me past like the more like overt theme, because let's put it this way. There's a scene in this film where Marmalade is trying to make these bad guys reformed and basically dresses them up in pajamas. And Mr. Wolf is dressed up as a sheep. And your mind probably gets it now, wolf in sheep's clothing. And thankfully, the film never points this out. It's a visual gag. It's meant to, be a development of his character and to show that, he's not based on the stereotypes that he's born from, and realize the skin that he wears, obviously. And they do it actually quite subtly. I was surprised on that level. So like, so I guess like on like in terms of like the gags and the stylistic choices and where it's drawing from, and a lot of inspirations are kind of obvious here. They don't have to point them out too much. Like at one point they do reference that Mr. Wolf goes full George Clooney, so there's a little bit of that in there. So like, yeah, can you tell we're pulling from other heist films? But hey, if you're gonna pull from heist films, pull from the best, and they actually kind of do here. But yeah, just like the little subtlety with the gags and stuff like that, and the little visual cues I thought really worked here. There are a few sequences that are kind of like, yeah, they're par for the course. Like you kind of expect them. Like obviously there's going to be a song and dance number. There's going to be a lot of like, very, very sassy scenes. There's some jokes involving butts and stuff like that. That's par for the course. They didn't really annoy me too, just because I think even though these characters have very simplistic personalities, I like the way that they're designed. I like that the bad guys themselves do have like the mark of like a good character in an animated film is if you can recognize them in silhouette, and you very much can. You can see it all over the place here. Also, like, I almost forgot this character, but they're also pursued by a very eccentric police chief, Misty Luggins, a human being voiced by Alex Borstein, which has total Zenigata vibes from Lupin the Third written all over it. Just constantly obsessing with these people, always wanting to catching them. It's her life's work, and by the time she actually does like manage to catch them a few times, she's depressed that she got that far. So it's drawing from a lot of Lupin stuff here, but hey, if you're gonna draw from like animated films and like heist films, why not draw from it? And they actually do kind of come into their own with this film and make it more of its own thing, even if like a lot of like the action and chase sequences kind of feel like, these are decent scenes. Although I will say probably the most disappointing thing in the film is the third act. Just because the third act, in order to make it more exciting and have more action, it takes the sci-fi route, which I don't think really works here. It kind of makes it feel more generic than it should be. It's kind of like it's kind of like the same feeling I had when watching Detective Pikachu, which is like, okay, this is working as a detective film, but then you bring in like this sci-fi angle and it feels like a typical action blockbuster. And the same thing happens with the bad guys. It feels like a genuine heist film, but then loses quite a bit of that in the third act, which just feels like a generic animated action film. And thankfully, it does come around at the end by kind of like realizing, oh, yep, we're still a heist film. We did include this weird sci-fi angle, but it's still, about these guys, this whole gang realizing that they have to reform their ways and take responsibility, which is, it's a decent lesson. So, like, stylistically, it's a great looking film. It's definitely solid matinee entertainment. That I think works. I think for like the little nods to Ocean's 11 and Lupin the Third, I think a lot of adults will be fairly entertained by this. Kids will obviously like it because like the characters have very sassy personalities and they make jokes about butts and all that. So kind of par for the course stuff here, but it's charming. It's a charming little animated heist film for whatever that might be worth. All right. 3 down. 1 to go. 1 to go. All right. Debating which one I should do next based on like how much my voice can hold up. All right. Well, let's see. We will go next to the Northmen. Get some Robert Eggers in here. Woo. Amleth. I've been trying to practice saying like the cast the characters' names in this because like I've miswritten in a few reviews like Amleth as Almleth. Amaleth. 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 No, wait. Omelette. Omelette? I like some cheese in my omelets. All right. So, here we go. So, The Northmen is the latest film by Robert Eggers. Robert Eggers is a director who's done previous films like The Witch and The Lighthouse. So, very like cerebral horror films that are set in different time periods. And The Northmen is very much the same deal here. It takes place in the age of Vikings and is all about seeking revenge and finding more to your lineage and your legacy in the afterlife. Now, this is the third film directed by Eggers, and I think most people kind of agree this might be his comparatively worst film. And by comparatively worst, I say it's just like it's the weakest of the three. And I think that's because The Northman is probably like the most like the themes are very overt and it's the most accessible film to watch. Like The Witch is tough to watch if you're not in the mood for like a very like dark and depressing horror film. And The Lighthouse you kind of have to be in the very right mood for it. And the Northman I think is a little bit more accessible. Like, don't get me wrong, it's still very violent. It's still very dark. It's still very supernatural, and it's still very like surreal and cerebral, where it really does get under your skin. But it's also like the easiest film to understand. So it takes place in like the age of Vikings, and you have like this Viking warrior prince, Amleth, who has grown up basically learning all about the ways of the Viking from his father, War Raven, the king of his Viking tribe, played by Ethan Hawke. And basically, Amleth learns all about, what it is to be a Viking leader, but he kind of learns a little bit of, like, the wrong lessons. Like, he's taught that if he's just devoted to his family and his legacy and just commits to being incredibly violent and cruel, that everything will work out in the end. And he learns a lot of these lessons by getting weird visions. It's bizarre. Like, a rite of passage is that he goes into this cave with his father, and I believe like the jester or the seer, whatever you want to call him, played by Willem Dafoe, basically screams at them and makes them eat dog food, and says this is how you become men and all that. So Amleth grows up to become Alexander Skarsgård after he watches the cruel brother of Warraven, Fjolnir, murder Amleth's father, and then take Amleth's mother for his own. And basically Amleth escapes while he takes over this tribe, and just keeps repeating to himself, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to kill you and take back my mother and everything will be right in the world. But of course, he grows up to he grows up working as a Viking warrior in other tribes, and he basically gets too hardened to the life of being a very vicious and cruel Viking who's used to coming into villages and pillaging them and murdering people and setting fire to buildings with women and children in them. Basically, he's fully ingrained in the cruel lifestyle, so that when he sees the opportunity to go back to his tribe and to infiltrate and to kill Fjolnir, he leaps at that opportunity to basically go undercover as a slave and kind of slowly plot his revenge from within. But what I like about this journey is that, like, there's a lot that's kind of like, there's a lot of foreboding elements here that kind of like build up to let you know that there's going to be a grand showdown, that this is not going to end the way that he thinks it is. But I like that his quest has changed. Like, because Amleth thinks that this quest for revenge is very simple. It's like, it couldn't be more simple. I go kill Fjolnir, I take over, my mom's happy, all's right with the world. But the more that he infiltrates, the more that he learns that it's not that simple, and that in the time since he's left, Fjolnir has had a much different effect on the community and the family that he's raised, as well as not fully understanding the ways of his mother, Queen Gudrun, played by Nicole Kidman, who is absolutely vicious in this film. Like, you think that she's just standing there as like a prop, and then when you get to the third act, you realize, oh no, she knows how to pull strings. There's a much bigger story going on here. And the same goes for Olga, who's a Slavic sorceress who's in the slavery of Fjolnir. She's played by Anna Taylor-Joy, and she's basically the perfect ally for Amleth. She can basically she can hold her own. She knows when to fight back on Fjolnir. She knows how she can fight back at him, and when to time like just the right moment to like either spit in his face or throw something back at him. Like, she knows. So she's the perfect ally. But of course, like, he's going to need, Amleth needs way more than allies. He needs to actually, inspire some, he needs to make this village believe that he can conquer Fjolnir. So he slowly goes about night by night, killing people, and dressing up their bodies in really grotesque ways to let them know that, hey, all that stuff you did in the past, it hasn't been forgotten. And I'm coming back to kill you. There's a lot of supernatural elements here. There are scenes where, like, Amleth has to come into contact with the dead. He gets like a magical sword that apparently will finish the job, but it can only be used at night for some reason. He has these very beautiful, like, I guess like they're very dark and very I guess like the word is like more like fantastical and mind bending. But there are these like sequences where he is dreaming about like Valhalla, like the place where he will go to, where all Vikings go to when they die if they die in combat. So again, more forebodings here about what's coming. There's going to be a grand showdown between Amleth and Fjolnir, and they both battle each other on an active volcano. And it's pretty great to see it. And I think like this is probably like I said, this is Eggers' most like simplistic film because it's easy to read. It's easy to see what is being communicated here, which is that Amleth hasn't considered everything about what he's fighting for and needs to basically move on and start his own life. or let his hatred consume him. And it kind of feels like he reaches some sort of like middle ground where he feels like, like basically like his ultimate resolve is that he has to fight for something more than just himself and more than just like, for his throne, which is kind of noble. It's kind of noble to see that in this film. At the same time, it's very brutal, very grotesque. You do not want to see what happens to one of the people. Well, maybe you do. Maybe you do want to see what happens to one of the characters with their entrails in this film. Or see what happens when a bunch of body parts are stitched together. Lots of grotesque stuff like that happens in this film. And it's all treated with this very dark and somber and brooding nature that, of course, Eggers wields so well. And again, it really works here. So, like, I guess, like, you kind of have to put the, like, caveat there. Like, between all three of his films, The Witch, The Lighthouse, The Northmen, it's got "the" in every title. The Northman is probably like his weakest film, but that's the weakest Eggers film. If you're going based on like Viking films, this is probably like one of the best ones I've seen, because this film really works. It works on a cerebral level of like Amleth contemplating, his own mortality and his lineage. It works with like the setting where it feels like dark and grungy and dirty. It works with like how we reveal more about these characters, where they're very multifaceted, where even like characters like Fjolnir, we understand a little bit more about him, and even though he's still the villain, there is a lot more to him. We get to know a lot more about Nicole Kidman's character, who has an amazing monologue in this film, and just the visuals are just, they're immaculate in this film. Like, they're not as, like, stark as, like, of course, like, The Lighthouse is, like, black and white, so you have extreme contrast there. And it's not as dark as, like, The Witch. But part of me kind of likes that. It likes that there's this more, like, fantastical edge that kind of almost has, like, despite being so dark, it almost kind of has, like, a lighter flow when you compare it to the other Eggers films. But it's still like, it's still incredibly engrossing. Like, there's rarely a moment where it feels like this is just like a meandering picture of trying to, commit more to staging this specific period in time, as opposed to telling a story about one man consumed by revenge and realizing that revenge is dirty and doesn't always go the way that you want. So for like a very like typical like revenge film that you would expect with like a great, kind of anti-hero that you feel gets what he deserves in the end, and that he has learned something from this. But it's just staged beautifully, and just Robert Eggers, even if this like is his worst film, it's still an amazing film. It's still like, even if he makes no more, I think he's working on like a vampire film next. He might be trying to do that. But if he doesn't, he's got one hell of a trilogy here. The Northmen, such an amazing film. Another amazing film from Robert Eggers. Although I doubt that's much of a surprise at this point. Who doesn't love it? All right. All right, we're on the last film, and there's a lot to say about this one. I'm sure most people are familiar with it. All right. I think my voice can hold out for this. I think. I should have done the Northman last. I should have done that last. That would have been much better. Okay, well, we'll get through this. Last one. All right. All right, here we are. Final film. So, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent is a Nicolas Cage film starring Nicolas Cage, playing Nicolas Cage, or at least a version of Nicolas Cage. I've heard in interviews that Cage has said this is like one of the harder roles to play, because he's not so much playing himself as he's playing like an idea that a lot of people have of Nick Cage. Because the thing is, a lot of people have this vision in their mind of what they see Nick Cage as. And most people like equate him to like a B-movie actor. they only recognize him from like his more recent efforts, like, direct-to-video films and, stuff like, like Willy's Wonderland and, oh goodness, wasn't quite direct-to-video, but what was it, like Bangkok something he was in? A whole bunch of different, basically he's in a ton of films. And I like the fact that in this film, he kind of appears more or less as the version that we expect of him. And also kind of like, but also the version that I think a lot of Nick Cage fans wish that he were more like in real life. Because there's a great scene where Cage is at the therapist, and he's telling his therapist how he can't stand when people say that he works too much, that he's in too many movies. And it just says Cage firing back, say like, well, it's my job, and I like doing this for a living, and I got to take jobs where I can get them. Because I know, like, a lot of people, because the thing is, like, Nicolas Cage, a lot of people think he's just a B-movie actor. The thing is, people who say that, they're forgetting about other films he's been in, like Leaving Las Vegas and Moonlight and the most recent film from last year, Pig, which is one of the best films from that year. I almost kind of wish that this film came out a little bit later, just so that there could be more references to Pig, because they do reference a few other films in this Nicolas Cage movie, including, I did not expect them to reference Mandy, but they did. Mandy's a great horror film from 2018, if you haven't seen it yet. But I don't have to tell it to Nicolas Cage fans. So, Nicolas Cage is basically down on his luck. He's divorced from his wife. He can't connect with his daughter. He's too much of a film snob to connect with her. He can't land a job. His agent, who's played by Neil Patrick Harris, can't find anything for him. Like, he tries to read for people like David Gordon Green, but he can never quite get like that role, despite wanting to like perform right there, like read right there for the director in public, and it never takes. So his last job, the last thing that he has that can pay off his debts, is he has to go to Spain for someone's birthday party. So he goes to the basically the little, not quite little, but mansion, I guess, of Javi, who's played by Pedro Pascal, who's basically the ultimate Nicolas Cage fan. He loves all his work. He has like a big shrine room to all his stuff. Like, he's got like the guns from Face Off and the chainsaw from Mandy and the little, like, what are they, like the green chemical warfare balls from The Rock and all that. He's basically in love with Nicolas Cage's work. And at first, I love the fact that the film basically becomes most about like their friendship. Because at first, like, Cage is just like, he doesn't want to deal with anybody. He's, everyone's just like, oh, I'm biggest fan, I love you. And then, of course, when Javi says, like, hey, man, I got a screenplay. Could you be in my movie? And Cage is like, I get this all the time. I don't like doing this. But he eventually connects with Javi once they start talking about their favorite movies, and they realize, oh, they have a lot more in common. And then they start talking about, oh, we should write a screenplay together. And they do. And here's where the film kind of gets interesting, is that it veers into like very meta territory, similar to another Nicolas Cage film, Adaptation, where basically it's a film all about, trying to write a screenplay, but at the same time, the film itself is about what the screenplay is trying to be. So, it's not it's not as clever as Adaptation, mostly because like you can see where the correlation is here. Like, at one point, Cage and Javi take a lot of drugs, and then they immediately say, hey, it'd be cool in our movie if the characters did a lot of drugs. And then, of course, later on they say, oh, we should have like a paranoia thriller angle. And then, of course, they get paranoid and think that people are after them. And I kind of like how it carries on with like the less interesting overall plot here, which is that while Cage is visiting Javi, he's tapped by the FBI, who believe that Javi has like a kidnapped girl who's being kidnapped because of his mob connections and like an upcoming election. Not a very interesting setting, but it does keep Cage engaged there, where he has to stay and try to figure out what Javi's all about. But at the same time, he becomes way more focused on the screenplay. And there's a lot of great meta commentary in there about how, like, oh, I don't know if we need an action angle. Would people actually go see it? Yeah, they might go see it. And there's a lot of like very honest and like very relatable talk here, such as like, like Cage is all about saying, oh, we should do an adult drama. I like adult dramas. Oh, but God, nobody will go to the theater and see it because everyone just wants to see Marvel and Star Wars films. All these little kernels of truth and all these tiny little like citations they do of various Nicolas Cage films. I love it at one point, like when the FBI people are staking him out. One of them says like, oh my God, it's Nick Cage, from The Croods 2. And then this agent partner is like, what, Croods 2? It's like, yeah, have you seen Croods 2? It's like, no, I'm 40 years old. Why would I watch The Croods 2? So, and then of course, like there's a lot of people have circulated that clip online of the fact that Javi admits that one of his favorite films is Paddington 2. And then of course, like Cage calls him out because he's like, oh, you told me you like Dr. Caligari, and now you're telling me that you like Paddington 2, a commercial film. And it's like, have you watched it? And then they both watch it and they cry their eyes out, it's a hilarious scene, but it's perfectly timed too, because it works for the relationship dynamic between Javi and Cage, because like Cage realizes that there's more to life than he thought, and he just needed someone who seemed to have his same taste to connect with him and say like, oh, there are actually commercial films that are good. There's more to life than that. And then of course, by the third act, it's kind of sad that like by the third act there's not a lot of huge surprises. By that point, the film was pretty much on autopilot to become the action film that a lot of people were kind of expecting from it, where Nick Cage would actually take part in an action film. You have it connect around where he mends that relationship with his ex-wife and daughter. He actually is able to get a movie off the ground. So it's basically by the third act it's pretty much on track to be like the happy ending everyone expects it to be. It's quite it's a little bit similar to how I don't know how many people will go this far back, but the Player kind of reminded me a lot of that by how it got like to the end of the film, even though it's nowhere near like the catharsis of like the Player, so maybe it's not quite as similar, but it does have like a similar staging where it's like, oh, we actually got a movie off the ground and we actually managed to produce it. So like for like the meta commentary, the film is a lot of fun on that angle, and thankfully they do focus on the better moments. It does feel like the whole deal with like the FBI and the mafia subplot just kind of peters out by the third act, where it feels like more obligatory to wrap it up rather than present any new big twists or changes, which is kind of sad because there's a few decent twists in like the second act that it's kind of like sad that it doesn't go even nuttier with like the third act. But I will say though, it does have a lot of fun with like Nicolas Cage, or at least like the version that a lot of people like kind of view Nicolas Cage as. It does have some very self-aware comedy. I do like the fact that they bring back the Nicolas Cage from the David Lynch film Wild at Heart. Basically, the Wild at Heart Nicolas Cage appears in this film as his ego to basically remind him like, no, you don't have to settle for less. You're Nick, and I can't do this with my voice right now, Nick Loud Wolf Scream Cage. So in parentheses, put that in there. So like on meta for like the meta commentary alone, it was a lot of fun. I could not stop smiling and laughing at this film. I just wish that the script had like a little bit more faith to become a little bit more referential and throw in like a few more twists to it, because it feels like when you do films like this that have this type of commentary, that it kind of like wraps around too easily. I don't know, maybe part of me was kind of hoping that it would go a little bit more of like, like the referential route that like Seth Rogen's films would go in, where characters would go into bizarre places and would have not quite the same happy ending. But for a film that's all about just celebrating Nicolas Cage more or less, it gets the job done. And I think in the long run, what it will do is for like a lot of people who are just expecting Nick Cage to just be all over the place and bizarre and crazy, this is a little bit more of like a heartfelt film that I think a lot more people will probably look back on his filmography and go, oh yeah, actually Cage is actually a pretty damn good actor. Like this is not quite like, my fear was that this was kind of just going to be Nicolas Cage's My Name is Bruce, similar to like the Bruce Campbell referential film, which is just kind of like just poking fun at all the B-movie stuff and then throwing him into a B-movie. But thankfully it's not that. It's a love letter to Cage, and hopefully for a lot of people who have seen Nicolas Cage only as like the B-movie actor, they'll be inspired enough to go watch stuff like, like Con Air and Mandy and The Rock and Gone in 60 Seconds and be able to recognize like the actor for what he does. Because like Nicolas Cage is one of those actors where it never feels like he phones it in. He's always throwing everything that he can at the screen and definitely engages himself in his work. And this film definitely shows a lot of that love and commitment while at the same time having a lot of fun with the character and more or less the process of writing a movie. So on that level, as meta commentary akin to like adaptation and The Player, this film just works. It's a great Nicolas Cage film. Oh my goodness. Did we get through it? Oh, we actually got through it. All 5 films. Whew. All right. Well, I'm going to take that as a cue to wrap this up here. All right. So, quick recap for those who are joining us late here. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is a really good Marvel film that is almost a great horror film. I'd say it's probably like a good horror film. Probably good. We reviewed The Bad Guys, which is a fun style. I don't think it's like a great animated film, but it's a good enough animated heist film. We reviewed Pompo the Cinephile, which is a bit more fantastical than I would like for like a film all about filmmaking. But it works on that level. The Northmen, another great film from Robert Eggers. Kind of his worst, but still kind of good. And, of course, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent is a lot of fun for Nicolas Cage. So overall, not a terrible film in the lot. Not bad. You'll be fine if you see any of these films. Any of them. They're all fine. So, I will be back on another stream later. I've got more videos coming on the way. Singular reviews of these will be up at a later date. So my name is Mark McPherson. You can read my work at movieswithmark.com. That's my personal blog. Otherwise, you can read my stuff over at filminquiry.com, twincitiesgeek.com, popthrill.com, cinemaparadiso.co.uk, filmchop.com, and Visual Cult Magazine. I actually got them all this time. All right. Well, all right. I'll see y'all later.